Have you ever wondered if everything you believe about faith is being used against you? What if the very spiritual leaders you trust with your spiritual growth are using fear, guilt, and promises of prosperity to control you? Today, we uncover the hidden, dark practices of some spiritual leaders, practices designed not to guide you closer to God, but to exploit your trust for their gain. This is a story of manipulation, deception, and the heartbreaking truth about how some spiritual leaders use their power to turn the message of salvation into a tool for control. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a revelation. In this video, I will expose the 4 pillars of manipulation, methods some spiritual leaders use to grow their influence and wealth at the expense of their congregation. These pillars are not just theories. They are the same tactics I witnessed firsthand during my time under a senior pastor. You'll learn how emotions are twisted, guilt is weaponized, miracles are staged, and power is pursued relentlessly. But here's the question: how do so many fall for these tactics? And more importantly, how can you protect yourself and your faith? Stick with me till the end, because understanding these truths could save you from years of spiritual and financial exploitation. When I first began my journey in ministry, I was full of zeal and hope. Fresh out of seminary, I believed my calling was to heal souls, guide the lost, and share God's message. I wanted to make a difference, to be a light in the darkness. Little did I know, the darkness wasn't outside. It was within the very system I had joined. I was invited to serve at a well-established church led by a senior pastor who was admired and respected. His charisma was undeniable. People hung on his every word, and his reputation for miraculous works was widely known. I felt privileged to work under such a leader, thinking I would learn what it meant to truly serve God. But what I learned had little to do with God and everything to do with control. It started small. I noticed how the senior pastor spoke about the congregation behind closed doors. He didn't see them as people to guide and serve. To him, they were tools to be manipulated for money, loyalty, and power. At first, I tried to justify it. Maybe it's just how things are in leadership, I told myself. But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the patterns. There was a deliberate system in place, one that turned genuine faith into a commodity. You might think, this could never happen in my church, but the truth is, these tactics are more common than you realize. The emotional manipulation, the carefully crafted sermons, the staged miracles, they are all designed to keep you hooked. I'll walk you through each of the 4 pillars in detail, with examples of how they were used to exploit people's trust. By the end of this video, you'll be equipped to recognize these tactics wherever you see them. Before we dive in, I want to ask you a favor. If you find this message valuable, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to this channel. There are so many people out there who need to hear this, but don't even realize they're being manipulated. Together, we can spread awareness and help others protect their faith and their freedom. Turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when we upload more stories like this. This isn't just about exposing the truth. It's about reclaiming your faith and ensuring no one else has to endure what so many have experienced. When I started my journey in ministry, I was driven by a deep passion for God and a desire to help people. I had just graduated from seminary, wide-eyed and ready to serve. I believed ministry was about healing souls, guiding people to God, and spreading the message of hope and salvation. At the time, I thought I was entering a world filled with love, faith, and truth. I had no idea I was stepping into something far more complicated, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith and leadership. Not long after graduating, I was invited to join a well-known church in the city. This wasn't just any church. It was a place with a long-standing reputation, a church led by a senior pastor who was admired by many. This pastor wasn't just a leader. He was a figure of influence and power. His sermons drew massive crowds, his words resonated deeply, and people looked up to him as a spiritual father. To be invited to work under him felt like an incredible honor. When I met him, I was struck by his charisma. He had a way of making you feel seen, as if you were the most important person in the room. He spoke with authority, and his confidence was contagious. I thought, this is the man I want to learn from. At first, everything seemed perfect. He welcomed me with open arms, promising to mentor me and help me grow as a leader. He said he saw potential in me, and I was eager to prove myself, but over time, I began to notice things that didn't sit well with me. During meetings, he would talk about the congregation in ways that felt off. He didn't see them as people to guide and serve. Instead, he referred to them as tools to build the church, to grow its influence, and, most disturbingly, to bring in more money. He would say things like, "You have to know how to control them. People don't follow the truth. They follow what makes them feel good." At first, I thought he was just being practical. But as time went on, his words began to reveal a deeper, darker approach to ministry. What you're about to hear may shock you. It may even make you question everything you've been taught. But it's better to face the truth than to live in a lie. As we uncover these 4 pillars, keep an open mind and ask yourself, have I seen these practices before? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to protect yourself and your loved ones from these manipulative tactics. When I started my journey in ministry, I was driven by a deep passion for God and a desire to help people. I had just graduated from seminary, wide-eyed and ready to serve. I believed ministry was about healing souls, guiding people to God, and spreading the message of hope and salvation. At the time, I thought I was entering a world filled with love, faith, and truth. I had no idea I was stepping into something far more complicated, something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith and leadership. Not long after graduating, I was invited to join a well-known church in the city. This wasn't just any church. It was a place with a long-standing reputation, a church led by a senior pastor who was admired by many. This pastor wasn't just a leader. He was a figure of influence and power. His sermons drew massive crowds, his words resonated deeply, and people looked up to him as a spiritual father. To be invited to work under him felt like an incredible honor. When I met him, I was struck by his charisma. He had a way of making you feel seen, as if you were the most important person in the room. He spoke with authority, and his confidence was contagious. I thought, this is the man I want to learn from. At first, everything seemed perfect. He welcomed me with open arms, promising to mentor me and help me grow as a leader. He said he saw potential in me, and I was eager to prove myself. But over time, I began to notice things that didn't sit well with me. During meetings, he would talk about the congregation in ways that felt off. He didn't see them as people to guide and serve. Instead, he referred to them as tools to build the church, to grow its influence, and, most disturbingly, to bring in more money. He would say things like, "You have to know how to control them. People don't follow the truth. They follow what makes them feel good." At first, I thought he was just being practical. But as time went on, his words began to reveal a deeper, darker approach to ministry. One day, after a particularly successful service, he called me into his office. He was smiling, clearly pleased with how the day had gone. "Do you know why today was so effective?" he asked me. I hesitated, unsure of what he meant. "Because the sermon was powerful?" I replied. He laughed, shaking his head. "No, it's because I understand people. Ministry isn't about preaching the truth. It's about understanding what people want to hear. Give them what they want, and they'll follow you anywhere." His words stunned me. I had always believed ministry was about truth, about guiding people to God. But here he was, telling me it was about control. Over the following weeks, he began to mentor me in ways I hadn't expected. He called it teaching me the secrets of ministry, but what he was really doing was showing me how to manipulate people. He taught me how to craft sermons that played on people's emotions, their fears, their guilt, their desires. He explained how to make people feel so convicted about their sins that they would do anything to feel redeemed. "People are driven by their emotions," he said. "If you can tap into their guilt, their fear, their hope, you can guide them wherever you want." I started to feel conflicted. On the one hand, I wanted to believe that he was right, that these methods were just tools to help people grow closer to God. But on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I began to see how his teachings were affecting the congregation. Every week, they left the service feeling overwhelmed, some with hope, others with guilt. And yet, they always came back, desperate for more. One Sunday, after a particularly emotional sermon, I watched as members of the congregation emptied their pockets during the offering. Many of them were struggling financially, but they gave everything they had, convinced that their giving would bring them closer to God. As I stood there, watching the senior pastor collect the offerings with a knowing smile, something inside me shifted. This wasn't ministry. This wasn't faith. This was exploitation. But what could I do? I was just starting my career, and this man was my mentor. He had given me an opportunity, and I didn't want to ruin it. So I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place to question him, that maybe I just didn't understand the bigger picture. But deep down, I knew I was complicit. Looking back, I can see how easy it is to get caught up in something like this. When you're surrounded by power and influence, it's easy to justify things that don't feel right. You tell yourself it's for the greater good, that it's just part of the process. But the truth is, it's never okay to manipulate people, especially when it comes to their faith. And the longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes to break free. One of the first lessons I learned under my mentor was the art of emotional manipulation. He didn't call it manipulation, of course. To him, it was simply understanding people. But as time went on, I realized it was far more calculated than that. He explained that emotions are the gateway to a person's heart. If you can control someone's emotions, you can control their actions. And when it came to ministry, he believed that emotional manipulation was the key to success. My mentor had a way of crafting sermons that could move anyone to tears. He knew exactly how to weave guilt, fear, and hope into a message so that by the end, the congregation was completely under his influence. He once said to me, "People don't come to church for the truth. They come to feel something. If you can make them feel, they'll follow you anywhere." At first, I didn't understand what he meant, but then he showed me. One Sunday, he delivered a sermon on sin and judgment. His voice was filled with urgency as he painted a vivid picture of God's wrath. "You know what you've done in secret," he said, his voice low and intense. "The lies, the cheating, the sins you think no one sees. How can you ask for God's blessings when you hold these things inside?" The room fell silent. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their guilt written all over their faces. Then he struck. "But there is hope," he said, his tone softening. "God is merciful, and he wants to forgive you. But forgiveness requires action. You must give to show your commitment. Your offering is your first step toward deliverance." This was his method. Bring people to the depths of guilt and despair, then lift them up with hope. It was a roller coaster of emotions, and it was incredibly effective. He explained it to me later. When people feel guilty, they're desperate for relief. And when you give them that relief, they'll do anything you ask. They'll give, they'll serve, they'll follow. Every week, he repeated the cycle. One Sunday, it was a message of hope and breakthrough. The next, it was a message of judgment and fear. The congregation became dependent on him, constantly seeking the emotional release he provided. Guilt was one of his most powerful tools. He taught me how to craft messages that made people feel as though they weren't enough, that no matter how much they gave or how hard they tried, it was never enough. People need to feel like they're always in debt to God, he told me. If they think they've done enough, they'll stop giving. But if they feel like they're falling short, they'll keep coming back. One Sunday, I watched as he delivered a sermon on forgiveness. He spoke of sin as a shadow that clung to every soul, a burden that could never be fully lifted. "You carry this weight with you every day," he said. "The lies, the anger, the unforgiveness in your heart. How can you expect God to bless you when you hold on to these things?" The congregation sat in silence, their faces filled with guilt. Then he shifted. "But there is hope. God wants to set you free. He wants to bless you beyond your imagination. But you must take the first step. Show your faith. Give sacrificially, and watch how God moves in your life." The result was immediate. People rushed to the altar, emptying their pockets, convinced that their giving would bring them closer to God. This cycle of guilt and hope created a deep dependency on the church. People believed that their spiritual well-being was tied to their emotional state, and the pastor was the only one who could provide relief. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. By manipulating their emotions, he could guide their beliefs, their actions, and even their sense of self-worth. The emotional toll on the congregation was immense. People left the services feeling drained, yet they kept coming back, desperate for more. I began to see how damaging it was. People were being trained to believe that their value came from how much they gave or how deeply they felt. Their faith was no longer about a personal relationship with God. It was about meeting the expectations of the church. Looking back, I realize how powerful emotional manipulation can be. It's a subtle but effective way to control people, especially when they trust you as their spiritual leader. But faith should never be about fear or guilt. It should be about love, grace, and freedom. And no one should have the power to use your emotions against you. While emotional manipulation draws people in, guilt is what keeps them tethered. Under my mentor's guidance, I learned that guilt was not just a feeling. It was a tool, a powerful one. It wasn't about helping people confront and overcome their shortcomings. Instead, it was about making them feel perpetually unworthy, ensuring they relied on the church for relief. If people feel they're already good enough, he told me, they won't keep coming back. But if they feel like they're falling short, they'll give everything to fix it. Guilt didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was carefully manufactured. My mentor showed me how to deliver sermons that created a sense of inadequacy. You need to remind them of their failures, he explained. Make them feel like their struggles are evidence of their lack of faith. Then, offer them a solution, but only if they take action. One common method was to highlight sins that most people struggle with: dishonesty, anger, lust, or greed. These are universal, and nearly everyone feels some level of guilt about them. One Sunday, the topic of the sermon was forgiveness. It was a theme that resonated deeply with many people, as everyone carries guilt over things they've done or failed to do. The senior pastor began with a powerful statement. You think you've been forgiven, but have you truly let go of your sins? Or are you still holding on to the lies, the anger, the things you do in secret? His words struck a chord. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. You could feel the weight of their guilt settling over the room. Once guilt was firmly established, he moved to the next step, connecting their guilt to their giving. You carry this burden because you haven't fully committed to God, he said. You haven't given him your all. Today is your chance to show your faith. Give sacrificially, and watch how God lifts this burden from your heart. The response was predictable. People, desperate to feel relief, rushed to give. They saw their donations not just as an offering, but as a way to cleanse their souls. The brilliance and cruelty of this method was that it kept people in a state of perpetual debt. No matter how much they gave or how hard they tried, it was never enough. The pastor would say things like, God is pleased with your sacrifice, but don't get complacent. Faith is a journey, not a destination. Keep giving, keep serving, and watch how he continues to bless you. This created a cycle where people felt they always owed something: money, time, or devotion. I remember one woman in the congregation who was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She worked multiple jobs just to provide for her children. One Sunday, after a particularly guilt-laden sermon, she emptied her wallet into the offering plate. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I just want God to help me. Later, she confided in me that she had skipped paying her rent that month, believing that her offering would bring her a financial breakthrough. She was convinced that her struggles were a punishment for not giving enough in the past. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over time, I saw countless people sacrifice their financial stability, relationships, and even their mental health because they believed it was the only way to earn God's favor. People took out loans, maxed out credit cards, and gave away their savings, all because they were told that their blessings depended on their sacrifice. The worst part? The pastor knew this. He even encouraged it. People need to feel the cost of their faith, he said. If it doesn't hurt, it doesn't count. The use of guilt didn't just affect people financially. It also created a deep spiritual dependency on the church and its leaders. The pastor positioned himself as the only one who could offer relief. Come to me, he would say, and I'll show you how to find peace. People began to see their relationship with God as something that required constant validation through the church. They were no longer confident in their own faith. Instead, they relied on the pastor's approval and guidance. Looking back, I see how damaging this was. Faith should be about freedom, about knowing you are loved and accepted by God. But under this system, it became a burden. People were made to feel unworthy, and their only escape was to give more, do more, and try harder. It was a never-ending cycle, one that drained them emotionally, financially, and spiritually. One day, I reached my breaking point. After watching a family donate their entire savings to the church, only to lose their home a month later, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. This wasn't faith. This wasn't ministry. This was exploitation, pure and simple. Guilt is a powerful emotion, and when used responsibly, it can lead to growth and healing. But when it's weaponized, it becomes a tool of control. No one should ever make you feel like your worth is tied to what you give or how much you sacrifice. Your relationship with God is personal, and no one has the right to put a price on it. If guilt is the hook and emotional manipulation the bait, staged miracles and prophecies are the glittering lure that keeps the congregation captivated. My mentor understood that people long for tangible proof of the divine, something they can see, feel, and hold on to. He weaponized this longing, creating a spectacle that convinced people of his spiritual power. It's not enough to preach well, he told me. People need to see that God is working through you. Give them miracles, and they'll follow you anywhere. Miracles have always been a cornerstone of faith. They inspire awe and reinforce the belief that a higher power is at work. But what happens when those miracles are orchestrated, not divine? Under my mentor's guidance, I witnessed how staged miracles became a tool for control. They weren't about glorifying God. They were about solidifying his authority and ensuring the congregation's loyalty. I'll never forget the first time I saw one of these miracles in action. A woman, known for her chronic illness, was called to the front during a service. The pastor declared, "God has shown me that today is your day of healing." The room fell silent as he placed his hands on her and began to pray. Moments later, she cried out, "The pain is gone. I'm healed." The congregation erupted in applause, their faith in the pastor soaring. Later, in a private conversation, he revealed the truth to me. The woman had been instructed beforehand to claim healing. She was part of the show, a willing participant in the illusion of divine power. Miracles weren't the only tool in his arsenal. Prophecies were another powerful method of control. People believed he had a direct line to God, and he used this belief to guide their actions. During one service, he singled out a young man in the congregation. "God has a word for you," he said. "You are destined for greatness, but only if you obey his commands. Start by sowing a seed of faith today." The young man, overwhelmed by the attention and the promise of greatness, gave everything he had. To create these moments, the pastor relied on a mix of psychological insight and careful planning. He had an uncanny ability to read people, picking up on their fears, hopes, and struggles. Before services, he would gather information about members of the congregation, details about their lives, struggles, and aspirations. This information was then used to craft specific prophecies that felt deeply personal. For example, he might tell a struggling couple, "God has shown me your financial breakthrough is coming, but you must show your faith through giving." These words, tailored to their situation, felt like a divine message, and they responded accordingly. To maintain his image, the pastor ensured that only the most devoted and impressionable people were given a platform to share their testimonies. Those who doubted or questioned were either ignored or subtly ostracized. "Control the narrative," he told me. "If people believe miracles are happening, they won't question anything else." The staged miracles and prophecies had a profound psychological impact on the congregation. They reinforced the idea that the pastor was a chosen vessel of God, someone who could access divine power on their behalf. This belief deepened their dependency on him. If they wanted blessings, healing, or guidance, they felt they had to stay connected to him and the church. While some members felt uplifted by these miracles, others paid a heavy price. I watched as people gave beyond their means, desperate to secure their breakthrough. One woman, who was battling cancer, gave her life savings after the pastor declared that her healing depended on her faith. Her condition worsened, but she refused to seek medical treatment, convinced that her healing would come through her giving. The turning point for me came when I saw the impact these staged miracles had on a family in the church. They had been struggling financially for years, and the pastor promised them a breakthrough if they sowed a sacrificial seed. They sold their car, their only means of transportation, and gave the money to the church. Months later, they were evicted from their home. The breakthrough never came. Looking back, I realize how deeply manipulative these practices were. They preyed on people's deepest fears and desires, offering them hope while taking everything they had. Faith should be about trust in God, not trust in a person who claims to have divine power. But under this system, the congregation was taught to see the pastor as their lifeline to God, a dangerous and exploitative dynamic. Staged miracles and prophecies are among the most deceptive practices used in manipulative ministries. They create an illusion of divine power, drawing people in and deepening their dependency on the church. But true faith doesn't need spectacles or grand displays. It's about a personal connection to God, one that doesn't require intermediaries or showmanship. If you ever find yourself in a place where miracles feel too convenient or prophecies always demand something from you, it's time to question what's really happening. Power. This was the ultimate goal of everything my mentor did. For him, ministry wasn't about serving others or glorifying God. It was about consolidating influence and maintaining control. You can't lead without power, he told me once. And power doesn't come from God alone. It comes from how people see you, fear you, and depend on you. This mindset shaped every aspect of his ministry, turning the church into an empire built on control rather than faith. The first step in his pursuit of power was building an unshakable aura of authority. He positioned himself as the sole gatekeeper to divine blessings, the one person who could mediate between God and the congregation. He achieved this through a combination of charisma, strategic displays of spiritual power, and fear-based teachings. His sermons often included statements like, "Without a spiritual covering, you are vulnerable to attacks. Your blessings flow through the man of God. Stay connected to receive what God has for you." These words reinforced his position as indispensable, making people feel that their spiritual well-being depended on their loyalty to him. Within the church, he established a rigid hierarchy. At the top was him, the anointed leader. Below him were his trusted inner circle, handpicked for their loyalty and willingness to uphold his authority. Everyone else, the congregation, was at the bottom, taught to obey without question. This structure ensured that challenges to his authority were rare and easily dismissed. "People need to know their place," he would say. "If they think they're equal to you, they'll stop following you." Fear was one of his most effective tools. He would often warn the congregation about the dangers of disobedience, both spiritual and physical. "Don't touch the Lord's anointed," he would say. "Those who rebel against God's chosen vessel bring curses upon themselves." These warnings were usually accompanied by dramatic stories, tales of people who had dared to question him and suffered mysterious misfortunes as a result. One member, who had expressed doubts about the pastor's teachings, suddenly lost his job. The pastor seized the opportunity to frame it as divine punishment. "This is what happens when you go against God's servant," he declared. The pastor's pursuit of power wasn't just about control, it was about creating dependency. By making himself the center of their spiritual lives, he ensured that the congregation couldn't function without him. Every aspect of church life revolved around him. He decided the direction of the sermons, the allocation of funds, and even the personal lives of members. People sought his approval for everything, from business decisions to marriage proposals. "You must make them need you," he once told me. "If they think they can succeed without you, you've lost them." As his power within the church grew, he began expanding his influence beyond its walls. He forged alliances with politicians, business leaders, and other influential figures, using his position to gain wealth and status. He often boasted about these connections during sermons, framing them as evidence of God's favor. "When you serve God faithfully," he would say, "He elevates you to sit among kings." But in reality, these alliances were carefully calculated moves to secure more power. A key part of maintaining power was controlling the church's finances. Members were constantly encouraged to give sacrificially, with the promise that their giving would bring blessings. The pastor, however, used these funds to further his personal ambitions, buying luxury cars, funding extravagant trips, and investing in private properties. When questioned about these expenditures, he would deflect with statements like, "God's servant must be honored. When you bless the man of God, you open the door for your own blessings." The pursuit of power came at a high cost to the congregation. Members were burdened financially, emotionally, and spiritually. Many felt trapped, afraid to leave or speak out for fear of divine punishment. Others became disillusioned, their faith eroded by the constant demands and manipulation. For me, the breaking point came during a leadership meeting where the pastor unveiled his plans to expand the church into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. This isn't about faith anymore, I thought. This is about building an empire. I realized that I couldn't be part of something that exploited people's trust for personal gain. Power in ministry isn't inherently wrong. Leaders need influence to guide their congregations. But when power becomes the goal rather than the means, it corrupts everything. True leadership is about serving others, not controlling them. It's about pointing people to God, not positioning yourself as their savior. The pursuit of power can turn even the most sacred institutions into tools of exploitation. If you ever find yourself in a place where leadership feels more like control than guidance, it's time to ask hard questions. Remember, your faith doesn't depend on any human leader. It depends on your relationship with God, a relationship that no one has the right to control. Every journey of disillusionment has a moment where the veil is lifted, and you can no longer ignore the truth. For me, that moment didn't come all at once. It was a series of small realizations, each chipping away at the foundation of my beliefs about ministry, leadership, and faith. What began as unease grew into a profound reckoning. I could no longer reconcile the teachings of my mentor with the principles of love, grace, and service that I had embraced when I first felt called to ministry. The cracks in my faith in the system began to show early on. Watching the staged miracles, the guilt-driven sermons, and the endless demands for financial sacrifices left me with a growing sense of discomfort. But I kept telling myself it was for the greater good. I rationalized it as part of the process, thinking, maybe I just don't understand how leadership works yet. The pivotal moment came during a service when a family, clearly struggling financially, was called out by the senior pastor. "God has shown me your breakthrough is near," he said, his voice full of authority. "But you must sow a sacrificial seed to unlock his blessings." I watched as the father, tears streaming down his face, handed over everything in his wallet. His wife and children sat silently, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. After the service, I overheard the man say to another member, "This is all we had left, but I know God will provide." That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that family haunted me. I knew they had been manipulated, their faith exploited for financial gain. For weeks, I wrestled with my conscience. On one hand, I felt loyalty to my mentor. He had given me an opportunity, and I didn't want to betray him. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. People were being hurt, spiritually, emotionally, and financially, by a system that claimed to serve God but was really serving human ambition. I began to question everything. Was this what ministry was supposed to be? Had I misunderstood my calling? In my search for clarity, I turned to prayer and reflection. I asked God to show me the truth, to help me understand what was happening and what I needed to do. One day, while reading the Bible, I came across the passage in Matthew 23 verses 11 to 12. "The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Those words hit me like a thunderbolt. Ministry wasn't about power, control, or wealth. It was about service, humility, and pointing people to God, not to a human leader. When I finally decided to leave, it was both terrifying and liberating. I sat down with my mentor and explained my decision, carefully avoiding direct accusations. "I feel called to a different path," I told him. "One that focuses on serving people in a way that aligns with my understanding of God's love and grace." His reaction was cold. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Without me, you'll never succeed in ministry." Those words stung, but they also solidified my resolve. I knew I was doing the right thing, even if it meant starting over. With this newfound clarity, I knew I had to make a decision. Staying in the ministry under my mentor would mean continuing to be complicit in practices I no longer believed in. But leaving would mean walking away from everything I had worked for, the position, the community, and the future I had envisioned. It wasn't an easy choice. I struggled with fear, doubt, and uncertainty. What if I was wrong? What if leaving meant losing my purpose? But deep down, I knew the truth. Staying silent wasn't an option. I couldn't be part of something that hurt people in the name of faith. Leaving wasn't easy. I lost relationships, faced criticism, and struggled to find my footing in a new chapter of life. But despite the challenges, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I realized that true ministry isn't about platforms or power. It's about walking alongside people, helping them grow in their faith without expecting anything in return. Looking back, I see that the turning point wasn't just about leaving a toxic ministry. It was about reclaiming my faith, my purpose, and my integrity. I learned that it's okay to question, to challenge, and to walk away from systems that don't align with God's principles. Faith is a journey, and sometimes that journey requires us to take difficult but necessary steps. The turning point in my story was painful but transformative. It taught me that true faith is about humility, service, and love, not control, manipulation, or power. If you ever find yourself in a situation where your conscience is at odds with your surroundings, don't be afraid to seek clarity and make the hard choice. God's path isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Introduction: why awareness is critical. The stories I've shared so far may have left you with a heavy heart. Perhaps you've seen similar patterns in your own life or heard about them from others. The truth is, these manipulative practices are more widespread than we like to believe. But here's the good news: awareness is the first step to change. By understanding the tactics used by manipulative leaders, you can protect yourself, rebuild your faith, and help others who might be trapped in similar situations. If you are a leader in ministry, let this be a reminder of the incredible responsibility you carry. Your role is to serve, guide, and uplift, not to control or exploit. Ask yourself, are my actions pointing people to God or to myself? Am I serving their spiritual needs or my own ambitions? True leadership is about humility and love, not power and control. The practices I've exposed in this video are heartbreaking, but they are not the whole story. There are still many leaders and churches that embody the true spirit of faith, places where love, grace, and service are at the heart of everything they do. Don't let the actions of a few corrupt your view of the church or your relationship with God. Faith is a journey, and it's never too late to course correct and find a path that aligns with God's truth. Now that you've heard these stories and learned about the 4 pillars of manipulation, I urge you to take action. Share this video with others who might need to hear it. Help spread awareness so more people can recognize and escape manipulative environments. Most importantly, stay grounded in your faith. Seek truth, love, and grace in everything you do. And remember, your relationship with God is personal. No one has the right to control it or put a price on it.